Ice baths are everywhere right now. Athletes swear by them. Influencers glorify them. And somehow, they've become the symbol of doing something serious for longevity. But here's the uncomfortable question most people never ask. What if this habit that's supposed to boost your energy is quietly draining it instead? If you're over 50 and doing everything you can to age well, training, eating better, protecting your mobility and balance, the last thing you want is a habit that feels disciplined but works against your health span. Because discomfort alone doesn't equal progress. Biology doesn't reward suffering. It rewards intelligent stress, applied at the right time, for the right reason. In this video, you're going to see what science actually says about cold plunges, the real benefits that are worth keeping, the critical mistake that could be sabotaging your strength after 50, and the evidence-based way to use cold exposure without compromising your independence or quality of life. Stay with me, because this isn't about trends. It's about learning how to age better, on purpose. When you step into cold water, your body doesn't relax. It snaps to attention, instantly. Skin receptors fire, breathing changes, and your nervous system flips a switch from comfort mode to survival mode. This cold shock is the trigger for thermogenesis, the process where your body generates heat to protect core temperature. It's uncomfortable, sure, but biologically, it's a deeply ancient response designed to keep you alive, not to make you miserable for Instagram. One of the key players here is brown adipose tissue, often called brown fat. Unlike regular fat, brown fat burns energy to produce heat. When exposed to cold, it becomes metabolically active, increasing energy expenditure and influencing glucose and lipid metabolism. From a longevity and health span perspective, this matters because metabolic flexibility is a cornerstone of aging well, especially if your goal is strength after 50, mobility, and long-term independence. At the same time, cold exposure stimulates a surge of norepinephrine and a temporary rise in dopamine. That's why many people report sharper focus, elevated mood, and a sense of calm alertness afterward. It's not magic. It's neurochemistry. This short-term neurochemical shift can support motivation, mental clarity, and stress resilience, all of which play into quality of life and functional fitness as you age. But here's the subtle part most people miss. These effects are acute, not permanent upgrades. Cold exposure doesn't fix your brain or metabolism, it nudges them. Think of it like a wake-up call, not a renovation. Used wisely, it can complement evidence-based health strategies for healthy aging. Used blindly, it becomes another misunderstood trend. And this leads directly into something far more interesting, what cold exposure really does for your mind. Cold exposure isn't really about the cold, it's about control. When you step into icy water and resist the urge to panic, you're training your nervous system to stay regulated under stress. Breathing slows, focus sharpens, and your brain learns a powerful lesson. Discomfort doesn't equal danger. For aging well, this matters more than most people realize, because resilience is a cognitive skill, not just a personality trait. Over time, this practice becomes a form of mental conditioning. You're not just tolerating stress, you're teaching your brain how to respond to it. That ability carries over into everyday life. Managing anxiety, handling uncertainty, staying calm under pressure. In the context of longevity and health span, emotional regulation supports better sleep, healthier habits, and more consistent engagement in functional fitness and mobility work. There's also a cognitive edge here. Acute cold exposure increases alertness and attentional control, creating a state of calm focus that many people describe as clear-headed energy. Not jittery, not forced, just steady. For adults focused on independence and quality of life, this kind of mental clarity can make daily decisions, movement, nutrition, recovery feel simpler and more intentional. But here's the quiet truth. The real benefit isn't the dopamine spike. It's the practice of choosing discomfort on your own terms. That's a mental muscle most people stop training as they age. And when you reconnect with it, something shifts. Because once your mind becomes more resilient, the question becomes, what's happening beneath the surface, at the cellular level? Here's where cold exposure starts to sound like longevity magic, but only if you understand the mechanism. As we age, the real enemy isn't just wear and tear. It's chronic, low-grade inflammation. Scientists often call this inflammaging. It quietly accelerates cellular damage, undermines mobility, weakens strength after 50, and chips away at independence long before symptoms feel obvious. Cold exposure appears to interact with this process through the nervous system. When norepinephrine is released in response to cold, it doesn't just sharpen focus. It also acts as a signaling molecule that can modulate immune activity. In simple terms, the body shifts toward a more controlled inflammatory response. That's relevant for healthy aging because inflammation isn't bad. Uncontrolled inflammation is. From a practical standpoint, this matters for joints, recovery, and daily function. Less background inflammation can mean better mobility, smoother movement patterns, and more consistent participation in functional fitness. Think about waking up with less stiffness, walking with more ease, or feeling confident enough to stay active instead of sitting things out just to be safe. But here's the line that needs to be drawn clearly. Cold exposure doesn't stop aging. It may slow one accelerator of it when used intelligently. This is evidence-based health, not biohacking hype. And understanding that balance becomes critical because when cold exposure is used at the wrong time, it can quietly work against one of the most important pillars of longevity: muscle. Here's where the cold plunge story takes a sharp turn, and most people never see it coming. Cold exposure right after strength training feels logical. Muscles are sore, inflammation is rising, and the instinct is to cool things down. But biology doesn't reward what feels good. It rewards what supports adaptation. And when it comes to strength after 50, adaptation is everything. Strength training works by creating a controlled stress. That stress triggers inflammation, increased blood flow, and a cascade of anabolic signals that tell muscle tissue to repair and grow stronger. Cold water immersion immediately after training causes vasoconstriction and blunts this inflammatory response. In other words, it shuts down the very signals your body needs to rebuild muscle. This matters far more as you age. Muscle isn't just about aesthetics. It's metabolic health, balance, bone density, and independence. Suppressing those growth signals repeatedly can quietly reduce the long-term gains from resistance training. You might still feel disciplined, you might still do the work, but your body adapts less than it could. The insight most people miss is timing. Cold exposure isn't the enemy. Poor sequencing is. When you respect the recovery window and allow muscle to do its job first, cold can become a tool again. And that naturally raises the next question. If timing matters this much, what does an evidence-based cold protocol for longevity actually look like? Once you understand that cold exposure is a tool, not a miracle, the next step becomes obvious. Structure matters. From an evidence-based health perspective, the goal isn't to suffer more. It's to apply just enough stress to trigger adaptation without compromising recovery, mobility, or strength after 50. That's where a simple, science-informed protocol makes all the difference. Temperature is the first lever. You don't need freezing extremes. Water between 10 degrees Celsius and 15 degrees Celsius is sufficient to activate thermogenesis and the nervous system response. Colder isn't better, it's just colder. For healthy aging, safety and consistency beat bravado every time. If you can breathe steadily and remain composed, you're in the right zone. Duration comes next. 2 to 5 minutes is enough to generate the neurochemical and metabolic response without overwhelming the system. Think of it like seasoning food. Too little does nothing. Too much ruins the meal. Most people chasing longevity and quality of life benefit more from leaving the water feeling energized, not depleted. Frequency and timing tie it all together. 3 to 5 sessions per week, ideally on non-strength training days or at least 4 to 6 hours away from lifting, keeps cold exposure supportive rather than counterproductive. A simple example: strength training in the morning, cold exposure later in the evening, or reserve cold days for mobility, walking, or balance-focused routines. And just when this sounds straightforward, there's one overlooked factor that determines whether cold exposure builds independence or quietly erodes it. Here's the part that rarely makes it into cold plunge conversations. Cold exposure doesn't build strength, balance, or mobility. It can support the system, sharpen the mind, and modulate stress, but it cannot replace movement. Longevity, health span, and aging well are built through motion, not immersion. Cold is a supplement to the process, not the process itself. For adults focused on independence, this distinction matters. Functional fitness comes from patterns your body practices daily. Standing up, walking, carrying, stabilizing, reacting. No amount of cold exposure will improve your balance if your ankles, hips, and core aren't trained. No ice bath will preserve strength after 50 if resistance training is missing. Cold can help you recover, but only from work you actually did. The smartest approach is integration. Cold exposure works best on days focused on mobility, zone 2 walking, breathing work, or balance drills. For example, a day with light movement, joint mobility, and a calm cold session can reinforce nervous system regulation without stealing resources from muscle adaptation. That's how evidence-based health strategies stay practical instead of theoretical. And this is where the real mindset shift happens. The goal isn't to feel tough, it's to stay capable. Your goal isn't youth, it's independence. When cold exposure supports that mission, it earns its place. When it distracts from it, it doesn't. And understanding this distinction is what separates people who chase longevity trends from those who actually build a longer, stronger, smarter life. So here's the real takeaway. Ice baths aren't useless, but they're not magic either. Used intelligently, they can support longevity, mental resilience, and recovery. Used blindly, they become just another trend that feels productive while quietly stealing energy, strength, and progress. Healthy aging isn't about doing more. It's about doing what actually matters, at the right time, for the right reason. Now ask yourself honestly, are your habits helping you build strength after 50, protect your mobility and balance, and preserve your independence? Or are they just making life harder than it needs to be? Because longevity isn't measured by how much discomfort you tolerate. It's measured by how capable, clear, and functional you remain over time. If this video helped you see cold exposure more clearly, there's another piece of the puzzle you shouldn't ignore. You might be training well, but aging faster because of what's on your plate. I made a full video breaking down these 3 everyday foods may be aging your cells faster than you think, and once you see it, your nutrition choices will never look the same. Watch that next. And if your goal is to age smarter, stay stronger, and protect your quality of life, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Your goal isn't youth, it's independence.